We're embarking upon an elongated, almost shot-by-shot appraisal of Michael Mann's Manhunter, an exemplary, existentially charged, aesthetically enlightened, cerebrally consequential, filmic masterpiece of 1986. Manhunter so vigorously 1986, so then modern that it either renders itself aggressively dated or unambiguously distinct. The most important lesson of Michael Mann's Manhunter is how an aesthetic curates a wealth of narrative substance in a feature film, how the spaces around us are all considered historical aesthetics, which can be made or composed as unified, singular, consistent styles, and how even if an ideal to be as enthusiastically modern as perceived possible will perhaps inevitably date the film, it ensures an eternal appeal as a culmination of a pathological history which might otherwise be forgotten. Manhunter can be understood as the film which preserves 1986 as the present, as the perfect Hegelian state or society which evolved from the frantic 60s and has mellowed or submerged itself within the comparatively normalized, stabilized, idyllic post-war American neo-50s utopia. Manhunter has one of the most fascinating aesthetic distillations of America ever recorded, a series of suburbs and families surrounding cities of the business economies, patrolled by the night watchmen of the federal bureaus. The emergence of the dangerous, ill murderers are either consequences of this utopia's blind spots, or indications that the human psyche was not evolutionarily adaptable to the ecosystem of the American dreaming. The artifacts of a faded counterculture as a commodified CD collection, a solace in an empty house, though not a deterrent to primal, barbaric, homicidal pathologies. Events become actualized via film or video, moving images, recorded memories. As Marshall McLuhan or Brian Oblivion may have suggested, there are greater layers, more expansive psycho-impacts than one could realize when viewing imagerial media, moving pictures. The picture quality/resolution of the technology in question cements the moment in time, as home video footage of the 20th century has. When we witness this home at night, the POV of an invader via this home film equipment, it becomes realer and more intimate, closer to reality than the Hollywood impressions which the more expensive celluloid grants an audience throughout Manhunter's span. In composing an aesthetic, first and foremost, Mann allows for substance to flow from it, as opposed to attempting to film the depiction of a stealthy home invader as a conjuring of a plot device. Events are experienced as and on aesthetic terms, and so their artistic depiction must be informed by aesthetics, even when considering some degree of immersive, true-to-existence, quasi-realism, or a rendering of a designated, considered reality. Images first, narratives flow from them, cinematically. Do you see? Do you see? Think about just how much this potentially mild change in the shot's overall aesthetic has coloured the already pulsing mood. The suburb as a haven from which the treasures of the rest of the world can be awed over and reduced to comforting play toys, and now a capturing of innocence symbolically before it is understood as a brief distraction and commodity and not an early formative friend of the infant or child. Think about this shot without the penguin, and now with. That it is a penguin is not essential for the thematic symbolism anyway. It could have been a giraffe, or a leopard, or a walrus, yet the penguin is aesthetically more suited with the dominant colour scheme of this shot, I would assume. Plus, the giraffe would suggest Africa, a leopard predators, a walrus the 60s, the Beatles, which comes prominent into the film later on with the iron butterfly, which I inferred earlier in the video here. You really have to go all shining on a film like Manhunter, honestly, and so little decisions do totally matter. Though in this case, being a penguin, we can rule out certain other clues for subtext, which at least those other hypothetical stuffed animals could have absolutely been potential evidence or clues for, submerged intents of this delicate film. A creepy rush, a silent, inanimate witness to the most horrifying and uncomfortable of occurrences. The ontology of the home, the severe violation that is the home invasion, one of the most perturbing and traumatizing psychological sensations possible in the modern era, certainly. Terrifying. Some of the scariest shots in film history, one of the most upsetting openings to any film ever, and would plausibly top a list of them, especially if we were going for no blood allowed, I would suspect. White sheets, white light, Blonde hair, white curtains, green exterior, Mann dials the setting to best accommodate his cinematographer, Dante Spinotti, and also espouses a certain manicured idea of purity and settled, graceful, marvelly femininity. Very unnerving. Some of the most notable music in any film, I must mention, in that it is inimitable, a product of the time when it was produced, though if it makes one disdain the film, so be it. That may be entirely subjective. I wholly appreciate Manhunter as the preservation of a lost present. That these synth sounds were considered seamlessly modern is part of what makes Manhunter's contemporary 1986 America covertly uncanny, a cue for modern viewers in posterity, whether Mann intended it to be so or otherwise. So chilling. With the specific celluloid sheen here of the POV's camera, this event is rendered as an everyday piece of footage which anyone could come across, rather than a professional production, thus making it terrifying. Aesthetic is synonymous with the substance, obviously. The green glowing font, indicative that Manhunter is taking place in the world of computers and databases, a totally modern and cutting-edge phenomenon in 1986, consider the analog-dominated typewriter world of the 1970s, think All the President's Men, then think of this one. In the particular cut of Manhunter I used to view, the opening credits were a little bit different than in what we are looking at here, actually. Normally, the opening credits play out over this nondescript baby blue bedroom, another 1980s cliche, so I have heard, painted backdrop, white text so beautifully becoming of this scenery. It then makes the subsequent pan down all the more impressive. Wow, could a sky be that naturally blue? With Mann and Spinotti, and apparently anything is possible. Beginning here. Look at this. Forget about whether two people would ever sit like this. They might. And consider what it demonstrates about their relationship immediately without any dialogue even shared. Aesthetic communicates narrative substance. Aesthetic creates substance. Aesthetic also contributes to the world of Manhunter feeling more lived in, real, potent, thereby increasing the emotional effectiveness, the engrossment, immersion within the plotline. Manhunter's narrative takes place in a world, and isn't merely a series of scripted dot points for a function. Everything happens in a grid of circumstances, spaces, times, just as our world does. Manhunter may not be considered a realistic film in that it is considered style over substance, although it communicates a world which is extremely considerate of this experienced realm's composition. It may not represent the pathologies of those who experience it, but the cosmological ebb and flow of our reality. Yes, it does, perhaps. In a similar production, without the same consideration, this opening scene would enact a series of narrative visual cliches. In Manhunter, the reasons why Graham has retired, escaped, to this beach environment are inherently articulated, the seriousness is insisted upon. Even if one couldn't understand the language, they would totally get the gist of this entire scene playing out before us. Mel Bourne, a hilarious name, won Oscars for Woody Allen's films, and Mann evidently must have known he was a great visionary and so snapped him up for the Manhunter production then. Dante deserves the credit, again. This normally plays out over the blue backdrop. I prefer that. It lets this scene, then, breathe a lot more, really. How gorgeous this is. Aesthetic commands a mood, blue and indecisive. The best adaptation of Thomas Harris's work. As good as Demi's silence is, there is no challenge to Mann's. Manhunter. Dennis Fariner, excellent performer. This was Mann's masterwork. The director insists on the significance of every choice in his film, just as Claude Chabrol had, although doubly so here. Mann wrote his script. Chabrol may have written some of his scripts as well, though this is not always the case. I'm fairly certain. Though, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe, especially in the latter period, Chabrol was not writing these scripts. He was heavily transforming them upon directing them, although I don't think he even committed to much rewrites. I could be mistaken, of course. Framing is always everything, as you can see. Frame by frame, again. How is she feeling? You already know, don't you? Via her begrudging polite smile, the sunglasses, the hair, the disjointed off-centered framing, stellar. One image defines the nature of Graham's current life and what he might be leaving behind if he takes up Crawford's request here now. These three are so gorgeous. Look at these. What can I even say to these? Dante Spinotti, the greatest. Manhunter does not just ensure the extracting of a beach aesthetic as a whole and tangible pathos, but to the suburbs of the US as well. Let's observe as this film goes underway. It is a major quality that Manhunter doesn't wallow in New York, LA, Chicago, or San Francisco, metropolitan, mostly coastal, overfilmed quasi-labyrinths, rather than the idealized, soothing suburbs of comforting childhood or settled older years, either. And here is Graham. Modernity. It transforms Manhunter into a period piece later, yet it is proof of the concept of cutting edge, even if the bloom is so brief. Yeah, look at it. There are no mundane aesthetics, only subpar artistry. The aesthetics of a suburban home. Paradisal? An abandoned suburban home. That is existentially tumultuous, horrifying, challenging. Now Graham sees it. The home now looks as pristine as it would, via these Hollywood cameras, it would on a real estate monitored open inspection. Only if you choose to read between the lines is Manhunter's suburbia aesthetically objectionable. The politics of the suburb are quite fascinating, as in the inherent political implications of a suburban pathology, that is isn't it compatible with leftism? Is it inherently right-wing or even fascistic or just totally Ballardian? The point is, the suburbs are experienced subjectively, but maybe there is an inherent aesthetic majesty to them, as there is to everything, even the scorching Sahara Desert, unforgiving Amazonian jungles, or the horrifying, dangerous, stormy oceans, or perilous peaks of the Himalayas. The suburbs as bacterial materialism, as the mutated spawn of capitalism and the green environment, is worth a consideration, but also the endless suburban dimension as the potential aesthetic of a finer communistic equality and tranquility than the Eastern Bloc's Orwellian grey industrial apartment aesthetic could ever command, quite evidently. Anyway, let's move forward. A stuffed penguin makes a shot creepy. Try some little footwear. Oh, here he is. Now he more feels like a movie production prop than a disregarded, unpacked loose kid's toy, though because we saw it as a home video mise-en-scene before, from the POV of a home invader though of course, we accept it as seamless and a simple indicator of a family which, once, occupied this potentially ideal family home. Mann is a brilliant artist, my lord. There is an aesthetic to every environment, even those insisted upon as completely mundane, such as this one might possibly be. Yikes. One of the most disturbing frames in any film, potentially. Again. Dante, you magnificent composer of images, man. Oh my, what symmetry. Even shots like this are visually gratifying. It just knows. It is a very psychic sense of what is captivating and stimulating aesthetically, Mann and Spinotti. The interior design is extending the psychosomatic experience of the subject. If it can do so for a film character, why not to the subject in the real world? Is it the fault of a filmmaker's illusion, or a fault of the conditioning of the developed world, that interior design lacks a certain existential insistence for every single waking individual? Manhunter is aesthetically idealizing the then-present. It is a major justification, a rush of solace for being alive in the present, as lessons of history might to a younger person, and in invoking trauma and violent events, the relief which springs from safety becomes a very real phenomena for an audience, viewer, of Mann's Manhunter, I could at least assume. Even just making the feeling of drinking bathroom tap water a cherished luxury, because really, by global standards, it really absolutely is. No one ought ever be unhappy with bathroom tap water, quite honestly. Or a living, loving family unit, maybe. Aestheticizing the typically everyday. Everything in this scene is emphasized, communicated further, made more engrossing and lived in via aesthetic, seen here. Mann has been kind enough to show what different aesthetic makes, seamlessly via narrativization. Now, a scene of this sort, explaining the nature of the killer to the police force, has never been better. Observe Mann and Spinotti. Note some of this cut has low-res footage of Aurora cut, I'm glad this is here for the sake of our ad hoc analysis, as even without a lavish Blu-ray transfer, Manhunter's aesthetic verisimilitude is apparent. Even on low-res cameras, Manhunter on low-res proves that aestheticization of the everyday is entirely possible. Mark Rappaport's Chain Letters of 1985 is really quite similar in this respect, partially. Architecture and the existentialism of blue and white skies. Not often invoked enough. Remember the feeling of just looking up at it at 3 to 5 years old in just a plain suburb and how brutally Eno-esque spider and eye it all was? Manhunter has that sky in this scene. This is like something out of Fluid De Palma. Think 1978's The Fury. Really slick directing. Think about if the film was shot on a camera wherein this was the highest resolution it was capable of. Still, with a superlative understanding of filmic aesthetic, it would demonstrate. Mann plus Spinotti. Melbourne may deserve credit here also. Some of the finest framing, blocking, staging ever. Check this here. Now, the ability of this film to employ architecture as its own unique set/setting, as though it was composed specifically for the production, the work here ought to be studied and considered further. Maybe it has more to do with the particular quality of the chosen building, though clearly Mann and Spinotti are weaving it through a filmic passage in a way which traces the structure of the building, or the existential affect on the filmed subject, and distills the unity of the medium concurrently. The green as the Eden-like pulse of the earth beneath the formalized, bureaucratized, database-driven, anthill ecosystem of the human city. The finest direction in cinema, a strain in visual storytelling which wasn't followed enough, style as evidence of substance, and a conviction considering that ethos. For nighttime interiors, white painted walls, bright lights, nighttime exteriors, lights reflected in the windows, Manhunter most evocatively celebrated the existentialism of occupying tall buildings during the city at night, or at least advocated for the experiential totality of such a perhaps more common, though taken for granted, experience. The players in Manhunter feel it. To them, it is just an adaptation to then modernity, for their roles in the narrative ensure a permanent stress which downplays or mutates any existing ontological pulse which permeates the developed world at this time. I might claim from afar, having never experienced it, that Manhunter best exemplified a uniquely 1980s post war pathological malaise. What I suspect was felt during the 80s that is impossible afterward, due to the compressions of the 1990s, the ethereal library era of the 2000s, the cyberspace tsunami of the 2010s, and the digital enforcement of the 2020s. The unique qualities of the earlier decade is on finest display in Manhunter due to its taking place in more recognizable family or business or government settings, though believing in the most potentially optimistic relief via these otherwise considered mundane qualities. Like a visiting tourist to the United States might, the media idealized United States meets the lived-in United States within Mann and Spinotti's Manhunter, maybe. Perhaps I'm crazed. Melbourne. What a stellar artist. Visionary. We're going to let this film speak for itself for a little while, okay? Sweet. Questioning the origin of certain lighting in is something which 80s films instigate in the audiences, although, whilst the scenery, set slash room decor exists for its own sake, it wouldn't surprise one necessarily as a nifty decoration in someone's home, seamless style within the lived in, grounded plotline still. The supermarket scene. How a visiting tourist or child views these settings and surroundings, without cynicism, as excitement and beauty. How it doesn't really move the emotive pathos of the psychologically troubled players is speaking for itself, especially in the juxtaposition with the quasi-utopian sheen with which 1980s American modernity is, at least aesthetically, composed with, in this film anyway. Architecture. A film's asset if it is set in the present day. What is more immediately indicative of the time and place, according to a retrospective archaeological summary, than the architecture and or the fashion and clothing? Intriguing. Let us continue again now, yes. Ah, the photo lab. This is just dripping in atmosphere. The finest scene in American films during the 1980s, up until the Inagata-Devita scene, a finer use of post-war popular music than anything in Martin Scorsese, might be the case, I could suppose. What is the point of this style here? Demonstrates the space and character of the room and what Graham is doing in it via one zoom. Not style over substance. Style animating any substance. Style over substance as a point of derision is simply referring to films which have no or poor style in the first place, I would confidently state. What a set stage this is. Very impressive. What a strong production. You know, this film is very devoted to the thesis that representation creates another layer of quality extrapolated from the subject, which both dilutes the subject, yet purifies it, zooms in on the essence, yet obstructs the wider whole. Potentially. The best film about photography since Blow Up 1966, and video since, well, it may be a major first, and a more seamless, fluid effort than Michael Haneke's work later, I may claim, somewhat. We seamlessly move from mood to mood. The entire character of the film changes. This is demonstrating, I think, the cognitive dissonance, the polar moods of the pathologically disturbed, an extremely communicative film upon the human psyche, intensely impressive and vivid, completely stellar filmmaking. The nighttime existentialism of the 80s meets the majesty of well lit, built interiors which obstruct the outside world. If it were possible to feel alive and alert in both or either, Manhunter depicts how it would feel, even if one were left ambivalent or cold to it. Manhunter is very anthropological, sociological, psychological in how it paints the world of a psychologist's strident belief in modernity and modernity's eternal, inherent superiority to the past in any instant, without any doubts. And so a depressionless aesthetic surrounds those who are still unadjusted, malcontent, or uneasy in the pristine American 80s modernity. The more abstract segment of the film, when a character's interior and exterior fuse into one another. A monumental work of filmmaking, this one. I've said that many times. It bears repeating, to be fair. Watching these towers fall, precise, disturbing, fluidly. One may doubt that they could have directed this scene in an interesting way if they are presented with the script. Manhunter proves the finest transcendence from scripted scenes to finished directed feature films. What a superlative work. Too good, again. I love this 80s mentality that the 60s was a mistake, unleashed more repressed mental illness upon the idyllic American familyscape, and is now reduced to commodified toys for its former advocates anyway. Now they listen to Iron Butterfly on CD and let it decorate the house. The house, not the commune, their property, to be alone in. About the family which the 50s decreed was the meaning of happiness. Maybe the 60s didn't disagree, although was ambivalent or opposed to wage slavery. Well, families or certainly love were desired, and now families sated some of the former counterculture, not all. My claiming that Dolarhyde was one of the counterculture rests solely on his being a fan of Iron Butterfly, which is to say, certainly on board with the counterculture at one time. A prospective right wing fascistic character would not have that in his music collection, I presume. As I said, more brilliant, telling, time traveling, historiographical use of popular recorded music in film up to that point, maybe to this day, so sharply exercised here. America is still a forest. Shining slash tenant slash don't look now Borgesian recursive Aleph of entropy. How captivating, my goodness. Mann and Spinotti probably don't realize how great this was. Or perhaps they did. They were just insecure about their arrogance or convicted and younger. You know, the point is, they're extraordinarily clever. A typical shotgun blast in a television police procedural would mean nothing. These shots have the weight and impact of, say, Kubrick's work in Full Metal Jacket. Magnificent, yet chilling. Such an unbelievable accomplishment. Mann plus Spinotti. This scene might have been better off cut in the standard Manhunter edits, though it does bring full circle and make overall convincing the haunting madness which may or is causing Graham to break. He is feeling the isolation the killers are feeling, which then motivates their own partly resentful targeting of the civilians, the families in this case, and is on the threshold of breaking. He wants to see them, as Dolarhyde had. In Dolarhyde's initial stages of self-convinced, benign curiosity, before the psychosis takes hold and he has to then take their lives, as he tried with his love interest, in what was otherwise almost a near suppression of his homicidal violence. However, this scene also disrupts a flow which connects the rescue of Dolarhyde's love interest and Graham returning home to his family by the ocean. I think I prefer the film without it, although I have to admit, without this scene, I have often felt as though Manhunter didn't enough demonstrate, with dialogue to some degree this is accomplished, in the supermarket scene most effectively, potentially, why Graham was becoming like the serial killers he was studying. Without their affecting traumas, just knowing what it is like inside their heads is enough to supposedly break Graham's psyche. Or maybe Graham's pathos is innately psychopathic, and his upbringing was healthier. It is just triggered or disrupted by his attempting to track and follow the footsteps of these killers. Sadly, it might be a quite contrived idea. Even if it has a basis in realism, it just as well could not. Really, as a narrative device, it feels a bit forced, overdramatic, and sensational, though I felt better about that strand of the plot, with this scene included, I will say, overall. Heartbeat, heartbeat, listen to my heartbeat. Ow! Heartbeat, heartbeat, listen to my heart. Okay, so what is the fundamental appeal of Manhunter? Why did I spend so much time with Manhunter in this video upload here? Well, it's because I felt as though a film like Manhunter was a excellent distillation of Aven modernity, as I said many times in this video. The way it gorgeously distills the Aven modernity, Aven present, utilizing a world around itself to conjure narrative moods. It's so visually inclined. It's got to be one of the most superlative acts of transforming a script, which you read the script of Manhunter, and I doubt you would have the images in your mind, unless you'd already seen the film, which you do witness in the 86 Mann and Spinotti feature collaboration. And so that is why I am so obsessed with Manhunter, because it employs architecture, fashion, some of the most smart and seamless mise-en-scene in film history. Please nominate in the comment section other films which are comparably successful to Manhunter in this respect. Because a lot of other films rely upon sets and staged interiors. They don't take place in areas outside of Los Angeles or New York. They don't even bother to try and compose an aesthetic of the real world, which is then informed by cinematographic fluidity. The point I make in film direction, the point I'm making is Manhunter makes the real world seem a lot more viable and interesting than it is. Or is the real world not interesting? Or is it, in fact, our own pathologies which have distorted the perception of what's around us, of the present? The fact is that we can learn from Manhunter how to transform the everyday world into inherently filmic, aesthetic residue for a feature production. And I think there's so much potential in Manhunter, and perhaps the only filmmaker to really hone in on it has been Mann himself over the course of his filmography to some degree. It ebbs and flows perhaps, depending on the feature. Although, maybe you get to like something like Naoki Kato's A Bow, a Q, but that's much later, and I don't know if that was even necessarily inspired by Manhunter. By Haneke maybe, and it's a better version of Haneke. I only say Haneke just because I did reference Haneke earlier in this video. Although, if I'm bringing up Naoki Kato's The Bow Q, it's inevitable I'll probably compare it favourably to Haneke. I don't dislike Haneke, I just think some of the films I do kind of dislike, maybe a handful of them, but mostly I'm fond of them. I have a video on Happy End if you want the 2017 feature, if you want my more elaborated thoughts upon Mr. Haneke. Yes, Michael Mann's Manhunter. I think it's one of the most extraordinary, superlative film productions of all time, and I think the way it commands aesthetic, the way it has one reconsidering the aesthetics of the world around them, how they might frame them to make them interesting. And it isn't that, oh, you just framed it that way, so you made it appear interesting. No, dummy, it was always interesting. You were just too stupid and cynical and trying to impress everyone else by acting apathetic that you didn't notice it. By the way, Doug Walker is an unbelievable hack, and he does not deserve to be happy. Assuming he is, he might not be. Anyway, the reason I bring up Doug Walker, there was the Red Dragon Manhunter thing. Like, we're not even going to go there. Red Dragon is one of the worst things that's ever happened to this species. Like, it was worse than Hannibal, the Ridley Scott film, which was inexplicably bad, being a Ridley Scott film. And Hannibal's bad. Red Dragon was worse. I haven't seen Hannibal Rising. Apparently that's even worse. Not even going to go there. I saw some of the TV show. I think I saw the first season of the Mads Mikkelsen show. Pretty good, but it's a TV show, so there's a certain ceiling of quality which it's unable of rising beyond, as it were. That's my spiel on Manhunter. I'm going to end the video here because, as I've said in one of these previous uploads, the real insights I feel regarding these films come after these uploads, when I feel insecure and embarrassed about these being publicly available to view. I think, oh my god. And then my feelings on the film kind of hone in and sharpen themselves. And so I feel more confident and articulate in discussing them for the future. We will just close it here. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it very, very immensely. Fuck everyone, I'm done. This is my last video.